If you're old, like me by internet standards, which is now our accepted shared reality, you might remember the days of having to beg your parents for a Super Nintendo even though you already had a mostly functioning NES in the living room. It was a lot of folks' first experience grappling with the idea of a console generation, and the ensuing confusion ruined many a birthday. To this day, my parents still refer to all consoles as a Nintendo. It's a living nightmare. But back then, your main quest was made that much harder when you tried to explain to them that, no, the Super Nintendo did not play regular Nintendo games, and PC emulators had indeed not yet been conceived of. You might also remember, just a couple of console generations later, the PlayStation 2 was announced with the promise that it would have an astounding new feature known as backwards compatibility, which we assumed was some kind of laser. Then it happened again the following generation, when Sony revealed that their then upcoming PlayStation 3 would accept some PlayStation 1 and 2 discs. More on that later. So try to comprehend or recall, if you've harbored it yourself, the unique mix of rage and disappointment many gamers felt when the current gen PlayStation 4 shipped with no backward compatibility at all. What happened, Sony? You were once the king of console gaming backwards compatibility. And now, with the PS5 launch just over the horizon, Sony's messaging on backwards compatibility has been confusing up until recently when they finally confirmed their plans for older generation games. Let's go definition fishing. It's time for a look back at Sony's long, complicated history with backward compatibility. Back in 2000, if you owned a PS1, upgrading to the PS2 was a no-brainer. Better graphics, better sound, it could even play the smash hit of the summer, Eminem's Stan, so your parents would know what the score was. It not only ran your PS1 discs, it actually made them look a smidge better thanks to the PS2's superior anti-aliasing capabilities. That was possible because the PS2's hardware shared a lot of similarities with the PS1. There are two ways for newer hardware to play software meant for older hardware: software emulation and hardware emulation, or some combination of the two. So I guess that technically makes three ways. This system wasn't without its flaws, however. Metal Gear Solid suffered from compatibility issues, and if you wanted to play Tomba, a game about a pink-haired caveman boy killing pigs to get a bracelet back, you had to let the entire intro sequence play out every time you started the game, or else it would crash, like some Hideo Kojima fever dream. But it was possible, and better still, you could plug your PS1 controllers and memory cards into the PS2, and they'd just work. The PlayStation 2 represented the first console that upgraded your setup instead of simply resetting it. In that sense, Sony was years ahead of the curve, especially compared to their biggest competitor at the time, Nintendo. Most consoles released by Nintendo were their own closed ecosystem, rendering previous game cartridges and discs and even input methods obsolete with new generations. With some exceptions, like their handhelds and the Wii, which could run those tiny little GameCube discs and had extra ports for GameCube controllers. The PlayStation 3, however, is where things get a little dicey with respect to Sony's backwards compatibility. The PS3 had a rocky debut and a steep price tag, but did feature backward compatibility with some PS2 games at launch. Although, and this is where things get confusing, only first-run PS3 or fat consoles were even capable of that. If you owned the 20 or 60GB model, you had limited backwards compatibility with PS2 games. If you owned the 80GB model with the model number CECHE01, you also had limited backwards compatibility. But if you owned the 40 or 80GB with model number CECHK01, you were completely out of luck. Why exactly? You pay me. Later, when Sony began releasing new models of the PS3, or the beefed up numbers with 120GB hard drives, they took out PS2 backwards compatibility entirely. The only way you could play the PS2 version of, let's say, Shadow of the Colossus, or PS1 cult favorite Vagrant Story, was to buy the game on PlayStation Store and download it. So seriously, what changed with the PS3? First of all, Sony got rid of some PS2 specific hardware, specifically the Emotion Engine, the CPU that powered the PS2. It was included in some of those early PS3 models, but then removed, probably to help bring the price point down and allow for more compact designs. The PS3 itself also contained exclusive hardware that proved limiting when it came to backwards compatibility. According to Frank Cifaldi, director of the Video Game History Foundation, the PS3 development kit was, quote, the coolest system ever. He explained that it could play PS1, 2, or 3 games from any region, either retail or a burned copy. But it was the system's unique cell processor that was causing headaches. The processor's architecture was not standard, which meant third-party ports often ran worse on the PS3 than its main competitor. Sony then began replacing hardware-based backwards compatibility on the PS3 with software emulation. So you could play PS1 or 2 games provided they were downloaded from the PlayStation Store, which also meant you had to buy them, an annoyance for those who already owned physical copies. Finally, we come to the PlayStation 4, Sony's most powerful console to date, for at least a couple more months. But with all that power under the hood, it can't even load PS3 discs. And the problem is that damn cell processor from the PS3. Apparently, Cell was such a headache to develop for, Sony decided to abandon it entirely for the PlayStation 4. This meant developers couldn't even make digital versions available to download from the PlayStation Store, since the underlying software was incompatible. Currently, the only way to play PS3 games on PlayStation 4 is through PlayStation Now, Sony's subscription digital games platform similar to Microsoft's Game Pass or Electronic Arts' EA Access. But even with PS Now, players are limited to a small rotating library of selected games. Before we get to Sony's PlayStation 5 compatibility plans, let's take a look at what Microsoft and Nintendo have to say when it comes to backward compatibility. As I mentioned, Nintendo's first few home consoles had no backward compatibility at all. It wasn't until the Wii let you play GameCube games that things started to change. The Mario Party didn't last long, however. Although the Wii successor, the Wii U, was backwards compatible with the Wii, the Nintendo Switch uses proprietary Switch cartridges, rendering it incapable of doing anything with prior Nintendo discs or carts besides ruin them if you try to cram them into the Switch's tiny cartridge slot. It's a different story for handhelds though. Nintendo has long been considered the undisputed king of the video game handheld market, and some of that clout owes to the fact that backwards compatibility has been the cornerstone of all of their major handhelds. The Game Boy Color could play Game Boy games, the Game Boy Advance could play GBC games, and the Nintendo DS could play GBA games, and so on. I think at even one point you could plug your DS into the top of a Sonic & Knuckles cartridge, shove that into an N64 Game Shark cartridge, and create a weird, crude time machine. Probably. As for Microsoft, they seem to have learned from their competitors' mistakes, offering at least some form of backwards compatibility for the Xbox 360 and Xbox One. The Xbox 360 was not backward compatible at launch, due to hardware and software differences between that console and the previous Xbox, but offered it for select games later via software emulation, provided you had an external hard drive connected. At the end of its supported life, the Xbox 360 supported 461 original Xbox games in North America. The Xbox One is a similar story. You're not able to play every game disc, but after a few updates, a selection of Xbox and 360 games could be played on the system, and that selection is updated periodically. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. The Xbox Series X, though, is the upcoming generation's real standout so far, shaping up to be a nerd's dream come true. Microsoft has already confirmed that it will play Xbox One games and all of the 360 and OG Xbox games already compatible with Xbox One. On top of that, compatible games and games made available through Xbox Game Pass will get a slight boost in performance from the newer machine. Xbox's Phil Spencer said Game Pass games will, quote, benefit from steadier frame rates, faster load times, and improved resolution and visual fidelity, all with no developer work required. And the cherry on top, even Xbox One accessories and peripherals can work with Series X. Now back to Sony. As the hype train for the console continued on its journey of the past year, Sony's messaging on backwards compatibility has been less than clear. While the PS5 can supposedly play nice with PS4 discs and digital downloads, the company initially announced that less than 100 PS4 games would function on PS5. They later clarified saying, quote, the overwhelming majority of the 4,000 plus PS4 titles will be playable on PS5. And Sony's Jim Ryan had to clarify that statement most recently by saying in an interview with the Washington Post that 99% of PS4 games will be playable on PS5. So what did this 100 PS4 games comment refer to? Apparently it applies to the 100 or so most popular PS4 games that are getting full graphics and performance upgrades as part of PS5's Legacy Mode. That Legacy Mode, by the way, describes the way the PS5 will work when running PS4 games. And there's even a Pro Legacy Mode for PS4 games that have been optimized for PS4 Pro. Supposedly, Legacy Mode is so powerful, not every PS4 can handle the upres. We're told that has something to do with how PS5's GPU needs to clock down from its native speeds. Like trying to jog slowly next to your walking friend and realizing it's harder than just jogging at a comfortable pace. But that apparently bars some PS4 games from the compatibility party. The plan is to add older PS4 titles to the list of performance-boosted titles on a game-by-game basis. So what about PlayStations 1 through 3? Are they to be left behind in the trash heap of history? Is the cell processor to be blamed again? Might want to take a seat, nostalgic gamers, this one's going to hurt. Speaking with Famitsu Magazine, as translated by Silicon Era, after PlayStation 5's most recent PS5 event, Jim Ryan confirmed that the PS5 will not be backwards compatible with PS1, PS2, or PS3 games. Ryan said, quote, "We keep in mind the engineering specialized for PlayStation 5 as we produce the device. In the midst of that, the PS4 already has 100 million players. We thought they ought to want to play PS4 titles on the PS5 as well indeed, so we included compatibility with PS4. While implementing that, we also focused our efforts on taking in the high-speed SSD and new controller DualSense at the same time. So unfortunately, we could not achieve compatibility with those formats." Well, we should have seen this coming. Earlier this summer, a Ubisoft support page posted the PS5 as having no backwards compatibility at all with PlayStations 1 through 3, but the page was quickly removed and Ubisoft and Sony didn't comment on it. There was, however, a tiny glimmer of hope when a patent unearthed by Twitter user rank_schedule revealed Sony is at least considering using the ambiguous cloud to allow PS5 to play PS3 and older gen titles. According to an English translation of the tweet, older games would run on a virtual machine that, quote, "mimics the operating system associated with each game console." So now all hope is not lost, as it sounds like this patent someday could be tied to the existing PlayStation Now infrastructure, since PS Now allows gamers to stream the service's library of games. But Sony has not commented publicly on this recently discovered patent. Cloud streaming would take some of the responsibility away from the PlayStation 5 system itself, as the virtual machine would be doing most of emulating, and Sony wouldn't have to cram 25 years of tech into its new console just to play old games. Or Sony might just decide to sell us all of their old games on the PlayStation Store next gen. As of this recording, no news has been announced regarding the patent. So for now, we'll have to assume the patent will remain just an idea on paper. Unfortunately, this speaks to the industry as a whole and its historical lack of concern for preservation and archival. Looking back at the marketing push between each generation of new consoles, backwards compatibility was initially more of a bullet point to get players interested than just a key feature. And while it's true that backwards compatibility is less of an issue for the average gamers the further along a console is in its life, the people are showing more and more interest in keeping their old games playable. In the interim, games are constantly being lost to time, whether they age out of viable backwards compatibility or just aren't popular enough to warrant it in the first place. If you've probably noticed, there's also been an upswell this generation of games being remastered for newer consoles, rather than settling for a simple port. That's great, especially for gamers who didn't get a chance to experience them the first time around. But the process does require developers to have access to that particular game's source code, or else generate their feel-alike games from scratch. Alex Handy, director of the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, spoke about how in 2012, 2K Games wanted to remaster the original BioShock. Apparently, the source code for the game went missing. Handy said, quote, 2K had to run around computer to computer asking, "Does this guy have BioShock? This is one of the biggest games of the 2000s, and they couldn't find the source code." And BioShock was one of the lucky ones, eventually getting the remaster treatment when 2K released BioShock the Collection in 2016. But if you go back a couple of decades or more, you'll find tons of games stuck on the platform they released on, never to have been re-released or made available digitally. It's the video game tar pit, and it's where Tomba's bones lie to this very day. On a lighter note, Microsoft seems to have scored some points with hardcore gamers when they revealed their ambitious backwards compatibility plans for the Xbox Series X. Sony, however, has historically put the future first, opting to resell, remake, and remaster its classics rather than sorting out a long-term solution for backwards compatibility. And Nintendo is guilty of this too. They've notoriously re-released games from the NES and SNES eras on nearly every subsequent platform. Come on, don't tell me you don't have at least 2 copies of Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past on different systems. In the end, backwards compatibility news may not get the instant shine that new graphics and gameplay trailers do, but its value stretches well beyond the first year of a system's life cycle, and the financial impact on the overall cost of a game library is noteworthy. A commitment to archival and the whole history of gaming keeps more games alive and available, ensuring older games, even those that are nearly forgotten, can stick around to be experienced by new generations.
Thanks for watching. What are some of the games you feel like have been lost to time and could use some backwards compatibility love? Let us know in the comments below, and of course for everything else PlayStation 5, keep it here on IGN.